If you are watching this video, you probably love Berserk, and I don't blame you. There are many factors which contribute towards one person like yourself loving Berserk. These include factors like the detailed artwork, the fascinating world, and the amazing storyline. But a question I have for all fans is, at what point in Berserk did the story really hook you in? You may be tempted to just say, Berserk is amazing from the first page. And while I agree that the first chapter is great in its own right, watch my video on the first 4 pages of Berserk here, I don't see it as including something which really distinguishes itself from other manga. Berserk is not average. It's not just good. It is in fact special. If you have read Berserk, you undoubtedly know it is one of the greatest manga works of all time. But back to the question, what scene or point in Berserk made you realize that Berserk isn't just a good story, but that it is a truly great one? In my opinion, all great mangas include some sort of point in the early stages of the story, which really signifies the readers that they aren't experiencing any ordinary story, but that they are experiencing something special. What I mean by this is an inclusion of a scene which foreshadows or signals some special aspect of the story, such as its great characters or its immersive world. An example of this type of scene in another great manga will be the Zoro vs Mihawk fight during the Baratie arc in One Piece. This scene is important to the entire story of One Piece because it was the first time the series laid the groundwork for how large and vast its fictional world was. Zoro, who at this point in the story had won every fight, was at least highly competitive against his opponents, gets completely outclassed and demolished by this newly introduced character, Mihawk. This was the first time in the story where the reader really understood how big of a gap there was between Luffy and the most powerful characters, and it signified how much more he and his crew had to go through in order to achieve their dreams. It gave a sneak peek to the massive fictional world of One Piece, where there was so much left to explore. Now back to Berserk and the first question. What scene in Berserk first truly enraptured you? What scene is equivalent to the Zoro vs Mihawk fight? Was it the first fight between Guts and Griffith? Was it the first encounter Guts and Griffith had with Zod? Or was it even as late as the eclipse? For me, personally, it wasn't any of these. It might even surprise you. It was the short sequence of events during the last quarter of the Blackswordsman Arc, when Guts was transported to the Abyss after defeating the Count. This was the first scene where we, as the readers, were introduced to Griffith. Upon my first read-through of Berserk, this was the scene which really pulled me into the story. This was the scene which made me realize that I wasn't just reading some mediocre manga, but that I was experiencing a special one. The scene was shown through chapters 3 to 6 of Guardian Angels of Desire, and in this video, I will be analyzing the scene and explain why I believe it to be such an effective way of building mystery and suspense. A quick side note, as you go through this scene, really try to envision yourself reading these pages for the first time, because what this scene excels at is its ability to make the reader truly curious and interested. During the ending scene of Guardian Angels of Desire, Chapter 3, we see a group of 5 shadowy individuals. The next panel shows one of the individuals' back. He is standing above the stairs, closest to Guts. We see Guts' face as he looks up at him. He looks enraged. The last page of the chapter finally shows a clear front view of the whole group. Puck quickly figures out that this group is in fact the God Hand. We see what they look like, but actually, what are they? The only non-human entities we saw in the previous chapters leading up to this point were the elves, the spirits, and the apostles. We saw 3 separate apostles, the one in the first page, the Snake Lord, and the Count. However, these individuals look completely different to them on a fundamental level. Through these few pages, we feel that these God Hand members are completely separate and hold a different type of presence compared to apostles. It shifts back to Guts, who grinds his teeth as he looks up. He has his eye locked onto this one individual in particular, muttering the name Griffith, but then quickly shouting it out. Guts knows this God Hand member, who's apparently called Griffith. The two share a short verbal exchange, but what really propels the scene is the last few sentences uttered by Griffith. Black Swordsman, you say? His petty existence is beneath our notice. The next panel shows Guts' expression again. It seemed to have triggered something within him. Even though his body is completely broken after going through that brutal fight with the Count, just through raw willpower, Guts somehow stands back up. The rest of the God Hand members narrate the exchange. One of them says something interesting. Extreme hatred towards the God Hand propping him up, towards Femto in particular, who after all is responsible for marking him with the brand. Guts retaliates against Griffith's words. He exclaims that Griffith is where he is at now, thanks to him, and that he's fighting an army of the dead because of him. Griffith continues to hold his earlier claim that he is nothing but a sacrificial offering. We learn a few things about Guts in this scene. We learn for the first time that even though he seemed so relentless about it in the previous chapters, finding the God Hand wasn't the heart of Guts' goal. The heart of his goal, or his only goal, was to get to this person, Griffith. However, we get more questions than we have them answered. While reading this part for the first time, the question which pops up into the fresh reader's mind is undoubtedly, what happened between these two? Park says this himself, and he represents us, the readers, the one who has no idea about the background and history behind these two characters. Guts continues to drag himself up the stairs with his Dragon Slayer, but out of nowhere, his brand begins to bleed violently. Griffith once more affronts Guts, and right after he whitens out, Griffith tells him, "That's as far as you go." Even though it seems like there's nothing left of him, Guts somehow regains himself, and he swings the Dragon Slayer towards Griffith. However, without even moving a finger, Griffith easily deflects it, and blasts Guts against the wall, where he bounces off, falling onto the ground very dramatically. This Griffith person is on a whole nother stratosphere in terms of power. Guts, who we had seen kill apostles, battle dozens of soldiers, is effortlessly beaten by Griffith, who doesn't even move a finger. And this scene just adds more wonder to the previous question. What happened between these two? And if there is such a big gap between the two in terms of power, how does Guts know this seemingly godlike being? Once again, the God Hand members commentate on Guts' actions. What tremendous fighting spirit. The fact that he could swing his sword amidst all that pain. They dismiss him as being finished. This leads on to my favourite scene in the Blackswordsman Arc. The next chapter starts out with what seems to be some sort of flashback. Upon a mountain of dead corpses, a young soldier notices his comrade and reaches his hand out towards him. This other soldier looks to be Guts. This young soldier speaks up. Martyrdom for a merciless god. What a waste. On the battlefield, the life of a common soldier isn't even worth a single piece of silver. In today's world, most people's lives are subject to the whims of a handful of nobility and royalty. Of course, even a king himself can't live exactly as he pleases. We are all at the mercy of a great tide, fate, or whatever you wish to call it. And we all disappear in the end, our lives spent, never knowing who we are. In life, unrelated to one's social standing or class as determined by man, there are some people who by nature are keys that set the world in motion. They are the true elite, as dictated by the golden rule of the universe. That's what I want to know. What is my place in the world? Who am I? What am I capable of? What am I destined for? As he speaks, Guts just sits there, watching and listening to him in silence. He even seems to be moved by his words. This leads to the next page, which is one of my favorite pages in all of Berserk. There is so much depth to this page. The noble soldier turns out to be Griffith, the same person Guts ends up trying to kill. He says, "You're the first person I've ever spoken to like this." This scene highlights the fundamental differences between Guts and Griffith. What's most obvious is the difference in their physical appearances. While Guts has short black hair, Griffith has long white hair, and this simple factor signifies the contrast between the two's both inner and outer characters. Griffith reaching his hand out to Guts represents the pair's differences in their geniality. While Guts is very aggressive and hostile during the Blackswordsman Arc, Griffith seems to have been very calm and gentle. Above all, the scene shows the contrast between the two's motives. While Guts was motivated by a single goal of finding the God Hand, Griffith is a visionary who has a grand dream and a clear vision of what he is aiming for. While we take all of this in, it does answer some parts of the previous questions, but it once again raises more questions. Back to Puck's first question: what happened between these two? In this scene, we learn that the two used to be comrades, and not only that, Griffith viewed Guts as someone special, since he was the first person he opened up to about his dream, and it seems that this respect was mutual. There is a narration on the page stating, "At that time, he shone before me as something beautiful, noble, and larger than life." This is a narration obviously made by Guts. It shows that he had some sort of an admiration for Griffith. Also, in the previous chapters, Guts was seen to be extremely hostile towards physical contact, but he didn't show any sign of resistance towards Griffith. This shows that at one point, he trusted him. However, even though we learn where the two used to be, the situation becomes more complex. We find ourselves asking, how did these two go from friendly comrades to fierce enemies, as they were portrayed in the previous chapter? What kind of event had to have taken place for Guts to hate and resent Griffith so much? In addition, Griffith mentioned how he wanted to know his place in the world, and what he was destined for, leading us to wonder whether he did end up finding his place, since we did see him in this godlike form just a chapter beforehand. And the next question is, how the hell did this young soldier, who was a normal human being like Guts, end up turning into the seemingly godlike entity? In the previous chapter, Guts stated that Griffith was where he is at now thanks to him. Which further leads us to wonder, did Guts really contribute towards this transformation? And if so, how? This whole situation just lays down a bunch of questions which we as the readers desperately want to have answered. It provides a huge sense of mystery and suspense, and it gives a glimpse or a sneak peek to this complex relationship or rivalry between Guts and Griffith, which also turns out to be the driving force of the entire story. And this is the whole reason why this scene really pulled me into the story, and why I believe it to be such an effective prologue to the Golden Age arc.